2030.
Saudi Arabia, the Public Investment Fund,
It's a
there's
big
a lot of excitement
This
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
The 2030.
The 2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla, 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 yalla.
Hala Walla Hannah, episode 10 of the 2030. How are you? Nice to see you.
10 feels like a milestone. It's good to see you.
Thank you. It does feel like a milestone. 10, and we're doing twice a week, so they're really kind of coming out fast. We have a good episode this week, and I just wanted to tease what we're going to be doing in the weeks ahead. Of course, we're going to be bringing on interviews into the show and starting to fold them into a segment we call the Mainstage, which will be just an interview format, but we like to have them be a little bit informal, let the conversations go where they need to go. And we have two really good ones coming up. Ramzi Abukhadra, chairman of the board of UBS Saudi Arabia, will be coming up on episode 11. We're going to make sure we get to the history and overview of the banking sector in Saudi Arabia for context, and then the current state of affairs in banking in Saudi Arabia. Of course, many of you have seen a Bloomberg article recently about the government's efforts to bring in foreign banks into the kingdom. We're going to talk about that, get his insights on that, and how the banking sector works in the kingdom, something we both have been curious about in recent episodes and often taking stabs at. And so it's going to be good to get clarity on that. And then in episode 12, airing a week from today, we will have an exclusive conversation with the one and only Manal Aldowayan, the famous Saudi contemporary artist who is currently representing Saudi Arabia at the Venice Biennale. Hannah, this is so cool.
I'm very excited as well. Two incredibly articulate and insightful guests who have expertise in completely different areas. So we really are covering so many different aspects to development and progress within the kingdom, and also to people that have so much experience within the kingdom, and their experience covers many years, so they can really contextualize what has happened over these years and the change, and it's really nice to hear that perspective.
Yeah, so one of the promises that we make with this show is that you're going to get insight into the changemakers that are leading the transformation of the kingdom. These are two guests that will take place over the next week, as I mentioned, that really were and are right there on the forefront of the change happening here in Saudi Arabia. Of course, Ramzi is a banker, finance guy, but he's also in the real estate sector. We will hope to get to some conversation about giga projects, the history of the development of Riyadh, and also what he's working on. And Manal is just, it's going to be so awesome and such a pleasure to speak with her. So both of these people, it should be mentioned, are also friends of yours, and you know them. And so it's kind of cool because we kind of have an opportunity here to speak with some people that really can just speak to what's happening and the change that's happening in the kingdom. So just really pretty exciting week coming up. Before we get going with this episode 10, which is a milestone and we should celebrate, I just want to remind people to subscribe wherever you're getting this: Apple Podcast, Spotify, etc., and then YouTube as well. And we are now in a new phase where we're going to start bringing out shorter versions of our conversations and snippets onto social media. So make sure that you're following us on Instagram, Snap, where all the young kids are, TikTok, and where all the old people are like us on LinkedIn. But yeah, make sure you're following us there because we will have some exclusive content there. And then last thing is we have a new, I guess not a new, everything's new, but an email newsletter that sends out our content once a week. And we put the 2 episodes we do per week in there and kind of fold it all together. So make sure you're getting that in your email inbox, please.
Yeah, way to do the marketing. The announcements. Very important. I think it's just like important to note that in Saudi, everybody's on Snap. It's not just the young people.
Yeah.
So.
Here I am on Snap and I don't even know why I'm on Snap. But I have Snap and then I go back to the US and it's just that nobody uses it there. And here everyone's using it. So we will be on there too shortly, again, with the young kids. So Hannah, shall we? Let's get to a deep dive. For today's deep dive, Hannah, so I'm still in Riyadh, as you can tell by the bags underneath my eye. And I am here for the Future Aviation Forum, under the theme of elevating global connectivity. Really an amazing and impressive show that has taken place at the Ritz-Carlton, Riyadh, at the King Abdulaziz International Conference Center, actually where we met, Hannah. And this event was really just very cool. 5,000 industry and government reps from around the world, 30 ministers, 77 leaders of civil aviation authorities, CEOs of airlines worldwide. Get to that in a second. So 120 countries represented. And then, of course, the cherry on top, yours truly, I was there. Just wanted to take some space here to recap the event, which I think, even if you're not like an investor in the space or interested in the space, there's enough that happened at the event where this can be worthwhile for you to understand what Saudi Arabia is doing in the aviation space and also just everything happening in the aviation space. So when you have big events like this, you have eye-popping big number deals that are announced. At this event, 102 MOUs signed, agreements and deals worth over $20 billion. Of course, you probably may have heard that 19 of that 20 billion was a deal between Saudia, which I'll be flying in 2 days, and Airbus for an order to buy an additional 105 A320neo family planes. That's the largest deal that Saudia has done. Actually, that Saudi Arabia has done with a European firm in the kingdom's history. So for those rooting for America, bit of a loss for Boeing, but that's okay. You can't win them all. And they, of course, had a huge deal that they did with Riyadh Air last year. You have big name speakers and interviews on stage, kind of headline making stuff. I don't know if you saw Hannah, Tony Douglas from Riyadh Air give an interview with Richard Quest from CNN, which was pretty interesting. Two entertaining speakers. So definitely worth a watch. I think it's on YouTube now. And if you're working in the industry, in the case of if you're working in the aviation space, aerospace, airplanes, drones, any of that, you are at this event because it's a really great networking opportunity for you to plug in, get some deals done, figure out how you can integrate yourself more into the regional aviation sector. But the more that I get involved with these events, and particularly when you're doing some of the speaker side of things, what amazes me is how much information is coming out, like oozing out of these events in every direction, not just from the speakers on stage, but from the organizers as they're putting out promotional materials and stuff to help you prepare for what you're doing on stage, and then all the booths and different representatives from different companies that are there talking about what they're doing. So there was some stats that came out, and I was trying to write them down on my phone. Like as the event was going on, I was, okay, like that's an amazing stat. I'm sure I'm going to be getting them in from every direction. So some of the things I just wanted to share about what was happening this week in Riyadh at this show. So a couple general stats that were thrown around that are kind of like amazing. 80% of the world's population has never flown on an airplane before, which I don't know, like that seems really high, but I don't know. And then 9 out of 10, all people will not get on a plane this year. So that's also seems kind of high. I don't know how that sits with you, Hannah. We can talk about it in a second. Tragically, while the forum was going on, a passenger on a Singapore Airlines flight from London was killed. More than 70 people were being treated for injuries. That happened almost exactly at the same time as a panel discussion on, is air travel safe? Of course, the answer is yes, but these anomalous events do happen. And actually, turbulence deaths are quite rare. The last time that it happened in America was 1997. Turbulence is on the rise from climate change, of course. But anyway, that happened actually exactly as a conversation or panel was taking place, which was very interesting. And then specifically to Saudi, obviously showcasing the investment opportunities that they had. They're targeting 330 million passengers by 2030, the ability to go to 250 destinations worldwide, seeking 4.5 million tons of cargo by 2030. In general, the kingdom says it's still targeting 3.3 trillion in investment by 2030. And the forums was looking at how they could showcase all the money they're putting into aviation these days in the run-up to 2030, 100 billion into the sector, 50 billion in airports, 40 billion in aircraft investment, and 10 billion in support and logistics. GACA says there's $53 billion and 958,000 jobs across various regions that has been created in the past 10 years from the aviation sector. And they're looking to increase the size of the sector by tenfold by 2030, which is, I mean, that's a huge leap, but that's the goal and it's out there and that was put out there. But anyway, so there's just so much stuff that comes out of events like this. And it was kind of cool to be there, to see it, to like take it all in, write it down, share it with you guys. So just a pretty cool week, and definitely kind of like a fun event because everybody can kind of relate to seeing airplanes, drones and stuff. It was awesome.
It's like a really fantastic event. I mean, as you said, I've been to some of these events and they're really overwhelming. Just so many people, so much information, really hard to absorb. And you leave and just try and process all of that. So I really appreciate that you did take those notes and wrote down some of those stats. Even if they're really kind of difficult numbers to wrap your head around, there's some incredibly ambitious targets that you've just laid out. And I think again, I don't think it's difficult to believe that 80% of the world has never flown. That still leaves about, 2 billion people that have been on airplanes and gone places. So that's a lot of people. And if you really just think about income levels and appetite, I mean, I don't remember what the percentage is, but I believe that in the United States, very few people have passports. So like people don't really leave countries a lot of the time, especially bigger countries where there's a lot of travel to happen within the borders of your own country by car or just different means of transportation. And then I know a lot of people, especially after the pandemic, that have decided that they don't really want to travel. I've heard a lot of Saudis say, I couldn't really travel during COVID, and now I don't really feel like I need to because I have everything that I want here in the kingdom, and I can travel by car and I can go different places. There's more freedom of movement. So there's just different appetites for different experiences that people have. However, obviously, that's not what you were talking about this event. You were talking about the other 2 billion people that are traveling the world and how we want to increase the number of people that are exposed, which again is something that I think is really important. Because it means that more people are, just getting exposed to all sorts of different cultures and experiences. And I think Saudi is uniquely positioned in the world to be a central place where people stop over, just like the rest of the GCC states, but maybe see a new place and experience something different. I am a little bit partial to Boeing, considering that I spent my childhood going to where its headquarters used to be in Washington State. So Everett, Washington is where Boeing was. I knew a lot of people that worked there. So yeah, I mean, it's great that Airbus is getting the business. Boeing's been going through a bit of a rough patch lately. Pun intended, unfortunately. And also, I'm really nervous about this, Singapore turbulence situation because I'm about to do a London-Singapore trip, and I saw that headline, and the first thing I was thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I don't want to go to Singapore.
So there's a couple things you said that I want to kind of address, if that's okay. Number one, no congrats to Airbus. We need Boeing to win these deals, and they are going through a little bit of a rough patch now. I'm not sure that affected the deal, to be honest. I'm sure if you asked Saudi, they'd say, no, it's just we decided to go with Airbus. But Boeing is going through a rough patch right now, and that's okay because they are a terrific company. Huge fan of what they do. They were definitely had a very strong presence there. And so sure, they're going through a rough patch now, but they are a resilient company and they will be fine. So I wanted to say that because huge fan. And I've never even been to Everett, Washington. So my bias is much larger. It's at the country level, but it's good for Saudi Arabia to have some choices, right? I mean, if it did come into play, it was nice for Saudi Arabia to be able to say, well, look, your competition isn't going through the same thing. So for this order, for this aircraft, and at this time, we're going to go with Airbus, and that's okay. Secondly, the turbulence thing, like wearing your seatbelt on a flight, I used to be like, well, to be honest, if this plane is crashing, this seatbelt is going to make no difference at all. But when you think about turbulence, sure, and turbulence is scary, man. When you're in, you get it and it's kind of gnarly, it just triggers the thought in your brain that you're on this flight and if this thing goes down, you have no control of it. Of course, I'm saying this now, psyching myself up for a flight in about, 36 hours? Yeah, so hopefully I'm sleeping for most of it, but we'll see. And you mentioned another thing, which I think is interesting, which is the change in how people traveled because of COVID. At first, it was no travel at all. Airlines were hurting. And I feel like travel is back, certainly at certain classes of flying. Prices are way more expensive than they were before. There's this weird still kind of adjustment going on in the industry. But in Saudi Arabia, what you also had is people saying, I'm not going to go abroad. I'm going to go within Saudi. So they're still getting on a flight most of the time, although they don't necessarily have to, but they're getting on a shorter haul flight Of course, Saudi Arabia's push for tourism affecting people's desire to go to Dubai from Saudi when they're trying to hope to keep people staying in the kingdom, spending that money, or Bahrain. Obviously, the climates are different from the destination, but it's like you're seeing a shift in pattern there. And then, of course, you're also seeing Saudi Arabia trying to position itself as more of a hub and a transit area. So, like, if you're going to Asia, like, and you're coming from the US and going to Asia, they're trying to get the people to fly through Riyadh instead of Doha or Dubai. So, obviously, one more thing. Sorry, I was super interested in this because the airport, there's a huge display of it, and it was kind of, I think, probably a graphic or an image we had seen before, but it was like it kind of gave sense of like how big this thing's going to be, and who knows if the new airport, which we talked about on the show, but it was just kind of cool to see those things and kind of touch and feel in a way what's happening in Saudi Arabia in this space specifically. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, it is cool. I mean, the thing with airports too, though, is like I'm very excited about the new massive airport in Riyadh, but you also hope to have a bit of international travel going through some of the other airports. As we mentioned, British Airways is coming back to Jeddah. I mean, obviously they are flying back and forth to Riyadh and London, but also going to Jeddah, going to Dammam, hopefully at some point. But I remember speaking to some people from Hayel who were saying that they would love for Hayel to also be an international airport. So I don't think that you need to restrict it to just the biggest airports, because sometimes just having more people coming through the country and thinking about the different airports is interesting as well. I mean, think about how many airports people can fly in and out of in the United States. Obviously, Saudi's the size of Texas, everybody always says. I think it's not necessarily that accurate. So it's not like as big as the United States, but it still is quite a big country. And then inside, you still would need to travel, let's say, between Riyadh and Jeddah would still, or Dammam and Jeddah would still take you about 3 hours. So, interesting to think about aviation across the kingdom's airports.
Yeah, and then
an expansion across the airports.
And within this sector as well. We talked about this before, but you're seeing kind of the differences now between Riyadh Air and Saudia. I did an interview on stage on the second day of the forum with Khalid Al Natour, who was CEO of Mukamala, which is Saudi Aramco's like aviation division, the second division formed within Aramco so they could do exploration and cool stuff like that. 50 aircraft, a bunch of helicopters, 13 airports that they're operating. Super interesting story and guy. They've spun it off now to be its own company with their largest client being Aramco, but now they're looking to do more B2B and B2G stuff. It was such a cool opportunity. He has given me a verbal agreement that he will be coming on the show. So we're going to work for that. And last point, if they ever introduce a DC to Dammam, which is already kind of a mouthful, then I'm coming to visit you and Aziz, and you're going to probably wish they didn't offer that flight. But yeah, I mean, Dammam is I've flown in through Turkey to Dammam, and kind of a convenient way if you're going through Europe. So anyway, what I'm saying is let's include Dammam and let's keep it in the conversation because it's a good airport.
You're welcome, as long as you bring Coco.
Okay, Coco. Well, listen, Coco's bringing me, I think is the best way to say it. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Coco and Pierce. And yeah, I've had a 3-week run here in Saudi Arabia, so it's getting a little warm for your boy. 115 degrees today in Riyadh. It's okay, though. Just not great for a suit. We are now off topic. Let's get to the news.
So Saudi Arabia expressed on Monday its condolences over the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, and a number of other senior officials that died in a helicopter crash on Sunday. The custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, and Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman offered their condolences in cables sent to Iran's acting president Mohammed Mokhbar. In his cable, King Salman said, "We came to know the news of the death of Dr. Ibrahim Raisi, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and those who accompanied him. May God have mercy on them. We send you and the brotherly people of Iran our deepest and sincere condolences."
What a story. What a tragedy for the people of Iran. Obviously, I'm an American and U.S. Iranian relations are not great, let's just say it. But this was still the death of a leader and a death of a human being. And what I think is interesting about the story and what I think is worthwhile mentioning is it just has to be put into the context of the diplomatic thaw that has happened between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And to have the leaders of Saudi Arabia use a term brotherly people for the people of Iran is noteworthy. And what a story, and really riveting. I was in Riyadh for the news, and I had BBC on in the background, and there was a long period where there just wasn't anything known. The helicopter was just gone. There was a hard landing, they said, and then the same B-roll used over and over again where people were kind of wandering around the mountainside in fog, and things didn't look good. Story, and sad as well.
Very sad. I did hear the spokesperson for the White House also sending condolences. I think loss of life is always something that is sad. And no matter what the diplomatic relations are, I don't think it's ever something anybody can celebrate at this level, especially in a horrific accident like that. I am very actually encouraged by the positive sentiments that have come from around the world. It's never easy to lose a leader. And I think I was thinking about when I heard this news, I also was thinking about, for instance, the attempted assassination of the Slovak president last week. And just it would no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, you never want the disruption to happen in this way. It's too jarring. So, thoughts and prayers are with the people of Iran.
Yeah. With that said, Raisi has been accused of doing some very horrible things, and that is not something that we're just going to completely paper over and say, well, it doesn't matter what he did. It's sad, because I certainly don't feel that way. We've talked about this, Hannah, as we build out this podcast and eventually a family of podcasts. We are not going to spend a lot of time on regional political issues. It is not something that we want to talk about much unless it directly affects the journey of Saudi Arabia as it transforms itself. Saudi Arabia's relationship with Iran is very much part of that story. So we wanted to include this as well because it's one of those stories that is just very shocking. While I personally, and as an American, am not going to let Raisi off for what he's allegedly done, this is still a sad story. And it was noteworthy that the king and the crown prince expressed their condolences. There is that. And yeah, so very sad, very interesting story, especially in a region of disruption right now. Anyway, moving on. The Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development has issued new regulations to create a legal framework from freelance and flexo work. This is the latest move in the government's push to open up regional and international corporates while accommodating and streamlining the different contracting systems that are currently gaining traction in the job market. There are currently 35,000 workers on the system, according to the ministry's website.
So workers are allowed to clock in a maximum of 95 hours per month with one employer, which is half the number of working hours required by private sector for employees to be on standard contracts. Workers on the flexible work system can put in a maximum of 160 hours per month with one employer, but will have to be paid for overtime. And overtime payment can be in the same hourly amount mentioned in the initial contract. Basically, the idea here is that there is an opening up of the space where Saudi people can kind of engage in different types of contract, different work, different flexible contracts with different companies instead of being contracted to one company. And the companies benefit because it adds nitaqat points to the company. So companies with a minimum of 160 hours of work registered by any number of employees under this system will be able to receive nitaqat points.
Fascinating. Interesting. This is a space that's very controversial and interesting in the United States. Flexo work has gotten a little out of control. I personally love it. Of course, who doesn't? And the pandemic, which we have discussed recently as well, has had a major effect. So has technology. It's an interesting space, interesting here. This is very much still a very in-person work culture in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, interesting.
Also, in other news, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have reached a near final set of arrangements for a defense pact that includes a civil nuclear component, but obstacles remain for the broader regional deal that would normalize relations between Israel and Riyadh. a senior U.S. official said on Tuesday. Our news is getting a little political for my taste.
It is, but this is political and economic in a way. This is also about the nuclear component of this, which is something that I'm very interested in because it would be absolutely terrific for the United States to be in a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia for peaceful energy purposes. Because in my opinion, if they miss out, there are 5 to 6 players that will come in a New York minute and fill the gap for Saudi Arabia, who will be pursuing this anyway. For the U.S. to not have a 1, 2, 3 agreement or not get it together to participate would just be another missed opportunity for the United States, which used to have a very strong presence in the Saudi economy and used to be the first partner for many deals, now competing with many other players. So it's interesting in that it is also tied to a defense pact, which would be, yes, brings a little bit more into the political realm, but that would certainly have an impact on the trajectory of Vision 2030 and the stability of the kingdom in a very difficult region. But yes,
yeah,
very political.
I guess since we've touched on it, I think the defense pact also, like the U.S. official that did speak to the matter also included that while the deal was more or less complete, it cautioned that certain elements, including a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood and steps on stabilizing the war-torn Gaza Strip, still needed to be completed. So I don't know how close they are, but it'll be interesting to watch this space.
It's all interrelated. So as much as we'd like to avoid it, and we typically would, this is a very interconnected issue, as you just highlighted. Minister of Economy and Planning Faisal Al Ibrahim meets this week in Riyadh with a delegation from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, my dear friends, headed by Vice President of Middle East Affairs, my boy, Steve Lutz, who is the man. During the meeting, they discuss areas of cooperation and topics of common interest. Steve is one of the all-time good guys.
Yeah, so is Faisal Ibrahim. Honestly, the Minister of Economy and Planning is the best as well. I think that the ministry is really interesting. Traditionally, it was that ministry that was setting those 5-year economic plans that people might be familiar with if they were looking at historical data on Saudi economy and development. And they continue to monitor different aspects of the Saudi economy. So they work alongside the different ministries, producing studies and also creating opportunities for new investment. For instance, they were the engine behind hosting the World Economic Forum, which happened in Saudi Arabia earlier, or later last month, or when was it? May,
Time sure flies here.
Earlier or later. However, I think that, the Ministry of Economy and Planning do some really interesting research in social as well as economic areas of Saudi Arabia's development. At some point, you need to unpack the reason why you call people your boy, because I don't hear that from everybody.
No, but
that expression.
Yeah, like my boys. I use it as this is like my homie, and Steve Lutz is my boy. Anyway, you're probably looking for a more substantial unpacking than that, but that's all you're getting right now. The Red Sea International Film Festival, RCIF, and Vanity Fair Europe recently co-hosted a glittering Women in Cinema Gala, shining a spotlight on 6 extraordinary women who are transforming the global film landscape. The gala, held in conjunction with the 77th Cannes Film Festival, is part of the Red Sea Film Foundation's ongoing efforts to celebrate emerging female voices in film, put both in front of and behind the camera, showcasing their contributions to shaping cinema and inspiring new talent in Saudi Arabia, Africa, Asia, and the Arab world.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that Saudi director Tawfiq Zedi's feature film, Noura, is the first ever Saudi feature to play in a Cannes official selection, set in Saudi Arabia in the 90s, where artistic expression was banned. The feature follows rookie teacher and clandestine artist Nader, who is sent to a remote village for his first post, which is very common for teachers in Saudi Arabia, where he connects with a young woman whose life has been stifled by the era of conservatism. So it was really exciting to have a film be featured at the Cannes Film Festival. But it's also pretty cool that there was this Women in Cinema Gala dinner that was held and sponsored both by Vanity Fair, but the Red Sea Film Foundation. They have an ongoing commitment to supporting and empowering emerging female voices in film. Through various initiatives and programs, the foundation is dedicated to fostering a new generation of talented storytellers from Saudi Arabia, Africa, Asia, and the Arab world. So it's great that the foundation is doing so much in general to really promote cinema in the kingdom, but also to empower Saudi women who or women in general across the world who are active in the cinema space, in the filmmaking space.
RSIF, they probably don't want me saying RSIF. The RSIF is set to continue its celebration of cinematic excellence during its 4th edition, December 5 through 14, 2024, in Jeddah, Al Balad district. Why don't they do it at Red Sea? I guess they need the cinemas and theaters. But anyway, that's coming up in 8 months. Very excited about that. And it's really cool because we just talked about the Red Sea, which is its Fashion Week 2 weeks ago. And that is also cool. A lot going on in the film space these days in Saudi Arabia.
In other news, Seven merges with Qiddiya. Qiddiya Investment Company has merged with entertainment business Saudi Entertainment Ventures, Seven, as part of Saudi Arabia's broader strategy to advance its entertainment ecosystem and expedite construction of the multi-billion-dollar project, according to the state-run Saudi press agency. Abdullah Dawood, managing director of Qiddiya and chairman of Seven, said, quote, "This step ultimately aims to create a new concept of fun and improve the quality of life by building an integrated and unprecedented entertainment ecosystem capable of contributing significantly to Saudi Arabia's economic diversification agenda," end quote.
Qiddiya is going to try to get 48 million visitors annually, which is that's half of the current goal that has been met in Saudi Arabia of travelers into the kingdom. They're looking for almost 50 million annually by 2030. Of course, it is home to future MBS Stadium, which is one of the coolest things you will see. It is a stadium that is architecturally spilling over the side of a cliff in Qiddiya, which is about 45 minutes outside of Riyadh. Played some golf there the other day, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, and so that is where we're going to have our annual 2030 shareholders gathering at that MBS Stadium in 2035, Hannah, because it's really cool. It's like a huge TV screen that's a stadium. Anyway, very cool. I had a friend tell me when I was in Riyadh, I congratulated him because I know that he's working in the sphere of this. And he's told me that it was one of the worst kept secrets in the city because everybody kind of knew it was coming, but still cool. So congrats to them.
Congrats to them.
Is that it? That's it. This was a good one, Hannah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.